Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another one of our nature programs. My name is Tara Moran. I'm a librarian at the Mastic Maritza Shirley Community Library, and I'm joined tonight by Julie Flores, a park ranger with the Fire Island National Seashore, which is part of the National Park Service. And tonight, Julie will help us explore Fire Island's Lighthouse. If you have any questions throughout this program, please enter them in the chat box on your screen. And of course, at the end of the program, there will be plenty of time for you to ask your questions directly. If anything occurs to you during it, I really do encourage you to put it in the chat. Julie will see it or I'll see it and we'll get the question answered. Now, without further ado, let me turn us over to Julie so we can learn all about the lighthouse.
Great. Thank you so much, Tara. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ranger Julie, and thank you so much for attending my program. And a really big thank you to the Mastic Maritza Shirley Community Library for hosting the events. I think it's so important for the National Park Service to connect with community partners to help share messages of education and stewardship. And I'll give you a little background about myself. I'm originally from Staten Island, New York. And I got my start with the National Park Service in 2015 now at the Statue of Liberty National Monument in Ellis Island. I started as a seasonal ranger, so I only worked 6 months at a time. And then I moved up to Bar Harbor, Maine, where I worked at Acadia National Park for 2 consecutive seasons. And I just started here at the seashore in December, and I will be here for an entire year. So really looking forward to the summer, getting to experience the beach and seeing, the culture of Fire Island. But I love working for the National Park Service. It's such a fun job. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And what's great about the National Park Service is our mission. So we preserve natural, cultural, and historic resources for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of all generations, and extends the benefits through conservation, recreation, and stewardship. So many of you may already be familiar with Fire Island and may have visited yourself. Fire Island National Seashore is a unit of the national parks. So not all national park sites are called parks. So when we think of the big ones like Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite, those are all parks. So there's actually only 63 national parks, but 421 national park units. So within those units are seashores like Fire Island, recreation areas, heritage sites, national monuments, historic battlefields, and so on. Fire Island National Seashore was established in 1964, mainly in response to pressure to protect the island from development and population growth that was engulfing Long Island at the time. So although Fire Island is technically 32 miles long, the National Seashore protects 26 miles. The National Park Service protects Fire Island for a multitude of reasons, but today we will explore its maritime history through the Fire Island Lighthouse. I actually live near the Fire Island Lighthouse, which is fantastic. I can see it right out my window, beautiful view. But the Fire Island Lighthouse was built to warn mariners approaching the barrier island on sandbars that could fatally entrap their vessels. So the first recorded shipwreck off Fire Island was in 1675, and at least 155 shipwrecks have been documented off the shore of Fire Island. Some were minor and others were more dramatic, which we'll learn a little bit later on. So the need for a lighthouse became apparent as trade and immigration from Europe boosted the number of vessels in and out of New York Harbor, which at that time was a growing hub for transatlantic trade. Greater boat traffic following the opening of the Erie Canal in 1821 resulted in an increase of shipwrecks off the shore of Fire Island. Kind of how Fire Island is situated, our sloping beaches, shallow waters, and abundant sandbars made safe passage quite difficult. Ships risked running aground on hidden sandbars if mariners navigated too close to the shore, in addition to strong storms and winds, which really just made matters worse. And here at Fire Island, offshore sandbars are constantly shifting, and that is due to something called littoral drift, which is the transfer and movement of sand from wind and wave action, which shifts sand down along the shoreline. And once trapped on these sandbars, extrication was usually difficult, if not impossible. Ships and their cargoes were occasionally salvaged by Fire Island residents or wreck masters appointed by local officials. Plus, the low-lying beaches between the Atlantic Ocean and the Great South Bay had very few landmarks to give mariners warning traveling on dark nights or navigating through fog especially. So Congress recognized the danger to mariners and the need to take action at the national level, which resulted in legislation in 1789 creating the lighthouse establishment, which would be the responsibility of the federal treasury rather than states, which it was previously. So to help mariners find the tip of Long Island, the Montauk Point Lighthouse was constructed in 1795. However, ships that were headed from Europe into New York Harbor, they bypassed Montauk to landfall further west, so there was no guide for at least 120 miles. If you don't already know, the Fire Island Lighthouse that stands today is not the original, and you'll soon know why. The lighthouse establishment appropriated $10,000 to purchase land on the western tip of Fire Island to construct a lighthouse as that navigational aid between Montauk and New York City. I think it's really funny that they appropriated $10,000 and the total cost of the project was $9,999.65, with the leftover 35 cents allocated as surplus funds. Unfortunately, inferior design and workmanship was the unfortunate hallmark of many lighthouses built during this time, during the reign of Stephen Pleasanton. He was appointed to oversee operations for the lighthouse establishment. He was described as being very frugal, penny pinching accountant, really only wanting to dispense funds only when absolutely necessary. And on top of that, he had no technical background of maritime matters. So even though meticulous standards were made, there were still a lot of issues. And the first lighthouse was completed in 1826. So as you see on the picture on the left-hand side, it was octagonal in shape, 89 feet tall, made from Connecticut River blue split stone, and its lights could be seen for 14 nautical miles out to sea. Just in case if you were wondering the difference between a nautical mile and a regular mile, so a mile is a unit of measuring length. So 1 mile is equal to 5,280 feet, while nautical mile is usually mainly used in navigation because of the relationship with the angular measurements along Earth's surface, and a nautical mile is a little over 6,000 feet. So keepers of the lighthouse, of the first lighthouse, had to cope with problems stemming from its poor design and shoddy construction. The biggest problem with the first lighthouse was its height. As I mentioned, it was only 89 feet tall, so it didn't clear the horizon, and the lighting apparatus wasn't very effective. So here are some illustrations of the original lighting apparatus. It was lit with an argon-style lamp. Basically, it's just a type of oil lamp which has a cylindrical glass chimney. You can sort of see it in this middle picture here. There's that chimney. and it creates a greater draft of airflow to promote more of a steady flame. The first lighting apparatus, 1826, the picture on the left, initially consisted of 18 lamps mounted as 3 sides of 6 of the argon lamps. And each lamp had a 15-inch reflector. So it's kind of this little plate looking thing. It was almost like a mirror, like a reflective mirror. Whale oil was used as the fuel source for the flame. And the apparatus rotated and flashed a signal every 90 seconds. So every 90 seconds, you would see the light from the lighting apparatus. Some revisions needed to be made. So in 1842, they made some changes. And it consisted of 2 sides of 7 lamps with 21-inch reflectors. So they tried to make it larger, maybe to get a better light out to sea. And again, still flashing every 90 seconds. But reports say that the light was visible for 27 nautical miles, but that would have been impossible. So according to the founder of the US Lighthouse Service, his name was Wayne Wheeler, he said that the original lamp and reflector system didn't generate enough light to be seen that far. And a mariner would have to be 220 feet high to see the light over the horizon. So as mentioned before, it was really the height that was the issue with the first lighthouse. My apologies. Let me get back to where we were. A U.S. Navy lieutenant did an inspection of the first lighthouse in 1838, and he said that the reflectors were badly placed. The stone of the tower was well built, but the cement was bad. It crumbled. There were leaks, and the lanterns appeared to be too small. So the shipwreck Elizabeth in 1850 agitated public clamor for an improved aid to navigation. Because of the death of a famous passenger, she was a noted writer, women's rights activist, and intellectual, Margaret Fuller. And a little bit more about her. As an educator, social reformer, and writer, Fuller published works on a lot of liberal causes. She served as editor of of America's first literary magazine called The Dial, and became the literary editor for the new newspaper at the time, the New York Daily Tribune. She, while she was in Italy, she visited Italy and wrote eyewitness and including a marble statue of John C. Calhoun. John C. Calhoun was a former vice president and secretary of state. Unfortunately, during the voyage, the captain died on board of smallpox, and the first mate assumed command. And as he was sailing, he was far off course when he confused the Fire Island light with the beacon at Cape May during a really powerful tropical storm in July. The ship drove onto one of Fire Island's most famous sandbars, 300 yards off the beach near Point of Woods, which was only 3 miles away from the lighthouse, causing an impact that ejected passengers out of their bunks. The waves were really rough. It lifted the stern, the back of the boat, which with that motion propelled the marble statue of Calhoun through the body of the boat, making a massive hole, allowing the ship to flood. And as the ship began to disintegrate under the assault of these breaking waves, all the lifeboats were smashed or washed away. 2 sailors successfully used planks to reach the beach, but the rest on board decided to wait for help. There was a volunteer lifeboat crew based near the lighthouse and attempted to aid the ship, but didn't really have any success. Most of the crew jumped overboard, but Margaret Fuller didn't know how to swim. So her husband, her infant son, and four other sailors remained on the boat. And after more than 10 hours, the ship began to break up and mountainous waves broke over the hull. Unfortunately, 7 of the 21 people on the ship died. So the loss of the Elizabeth and Margaret Fuller's death made international headlines. Famous poet Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote that it is time the United States, instead of keeping troops in forts, should keep a coast guard of lighthouses to defend lives and property. So because of this, because of Fuller's death, it created momentum for building a new Fire Island Lighthouse, in addition to other lighthouses along the East Coast, and the creation of the U.S. Lifesaving Service. It could be said that the wreck and the death of its most famous passenger influenced vast improvements in the safety of America's shorelines. So realizing that lighthouses alone weren't going to prevent all shipwrecks, Congress took action to improve the chances of survival for victims of maritime disasters. The U.S. Lifesaving Service was a very active government agency here on Fire Island in the late 1800s and the early part of the 1900s. The first lifesaving station on Fire Island was built in 1848, adjacent to the site of the first Fire Island Lighthouse. And it wasn't much. The station was just a garage that stored a surf boat, other rescue equipment, and some provisions for any shipwreck survivors. Now, these early stations were manned entirely by volunteers. Local baymen and farmers volunteered to live at these stations to patrol the coastline, looking for stranded ships and perform rescues when needed. And by 1854, there were 7 stations located along the south shore of Fire Island. Now, these brave volunteers, known as surfmen, had an unofficial motto: you must go out, but you don't have to come back. They patrolled the beach on foot every night from sunset to sunrise looking for shipwrecks. And when a stranded ship was sighted, the crew would perform a rescue using a beach apparatus, which consisted of a breeches buoy. So that is this picture on the right here, kind of looks like shorts, breeches, or pantaloons connected to a life preserve here, in conjunction with a system of lines and pulleys. And a Lyle gun or a small cannon was used to shoot a weight carrying a line out to the ship. So although very simple compared to what we have today, this method was used to rescue over 7,000 people from over 700 ships right here on Fire Island between 1871 and 1915. And in 1871, Congress appropriated money for paid keepers and crews at all stations. So this resulted in a more consistent training for surfmen. And through the years, the degree of professionalism and proficiency in the U.S. Lifesaving Service efforts rose greatly. So logs were kept, inspections were made, reports were submitted, surfmen were tested, and a ranking system was introduced. And eventually the U.S. Lifesaving Service merged with the Coast Guard in 1915. So the Fire Island original tower was too short to be seen far enough out to sea to be effective. So, shipwrecks continued. With complaints about the poor lighthouses increasing, the government sent a commission to Europe to examine how beacons were managed there. And the information they gathered persuaded Congress to make reforms. I find the story to be a little funny, but after fog delayed several members of Congress on a steamship off Sandy Hook, ironically, because the lighthouse reflector lighting system was so dim, the lawmakers placed all of the nation's lighthouses under jurisdiction of a new and permanent independent U.S. Lighthouse Board, which eventually merged with the Coast Guard in 1915 as well. So the upgrade to the Fire Island Lighthouse was made possible when Congress appropriated $40,000 compared to $10,000 of the first lighthouse to build a new tower, which today is equivalent to $1.4 million. The construction rate was about 1 foot a day, and the entire project was completed in 1 year, so in 1858. And that is, again, before OSHA, so that's how they were able to get it done so quickly in just 1 year. But the specification called for a taller tower at 168 feet with walls 11 feet thick and at the base, and then tapered to 2.5 feet at the top. What I found really cool about the construction of the tower is that it was built from the inside out. So if you see this picture on the right here, that is the staircase that leads up the tower. So the steps and center posts acted as internal scaffolding as the walls rose in height. What's also pretty neat too is that the walls throughout the tower aren't solid, they're double walled. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see the detail on your screens, but if we look at this middle picture of the cross section of the lighthouse, these brown spaces are the brick in the walls. And then the black area, that is all empty space. So those acted as ventilation channels, spaced evenly within the walls, which allowed the mortar to cure properly and provides a path for moisture and condensation for drainage. Originally, it was cream colored. That is this picture here on the left. It is in a sepia tone, but you can see that it does not have its signature black and white stripes, which those bands were painted on in 1891 to make the lighthouse more visible and easily identifiable in the daytimes, what they call a day mark. Every lighthouse has their own unique day mark. So with the new lighthouse, it was equipped with a first order Fresnel lens that would be visible for at least 21 nautical miles away, 24 at the most, compared to 14 from the first lighthouse. And I'll talk a little bit about how the Fresnel lens works. I have to do a couple definitions for you. So we're going to talk about reflection versus refraction. So reflection is when a light ray bounces off after hitting a surface. Refraction is when a light passes through a medium. So the premier lens available at the time were those fabricated by French engineer Augustin Fresnel. And he believed that the reflector system in place was inherently insufficient. He explained that the surfaces were never totally reflective and it was too hard to focus the light because half the light would be reflected and the other half would be absorbed. So he realized that the solution was to replace the reflector, so like those large, circular panels that we saw in the first illustration of the lighting apparatus. He wanted to replace the reflector with a lens. So by refraction, so bending of the light or the light passing through, the lens could take all the light emanating from the lamp and focus it into a beam. But using a single traditional style lens would require the apparatus to be huge. So he solved this problem by dividing the lens into concentric circles, which we have this beautiful, intricate beehive-shaped mass of brass and glass prisms. So this picture on the left here gives you a closer view of the concentric circles, and it allows light to transmit. To travel further and keep more focused. These types of lenses are still used today in lighthouses, as well as stage, theater, and concert venue lights. And the Fresnel lens was illuminated by a circular 5-wick oil lamp using whale oil. Over the years, due to overharvesting of sperm whales, colza oil and kerosene were used. And with the rotation system for the Fresnel lens, it emitted a 5-second flash and then was dark for 55 seconds. So how does the lens rotate? So we have a clockwork mechanism or apparatus. So before the introduction of electricity, the lighthouse had a clockwork mechanism very similar to a grandfather clock that caused the lens to rotate. So if you see the picture on the left here, you can see the gears of that clockwork mechanism and the base. This is the base of the Fresnel lens. So that clockwork mechanism would rotate this part of the Fresnel lens and then rotating the lens itself. If you look at the picture on the right, it kind of gives you, if you can see pretty clearly on your screen, a little demonstration on how it works. So it consisted of a larger weight attached by a cable through the center of the lighthouse, where the cable wrapped around a drum. So cranking the mechanism lifted the weights. So once the weight was lifted to its apex, just at the bottom of the watchroom, the keeper would let the weight fall, which would pull on the cable, rotating the drum, and a series of gears took the rotation of the drum and transferred it to the lens, which would then rotate to its unique lighting characteristic. Creating a specific characteristic required a way to regulate the speed of the rotation, hence the clockwork part of the mechanism. And the weight had to fall at a certain rate to create the proper rotation speed of the lens, and a regulator accomplished this. So a single revolution took 8 minutes. Winding the clockwork mechanism would keep the lens rotating every 4 hours, making the keeper's return to the top of the lighthouse to rewind the mechanism every 4 hours. So going up and down all those steps every 4 hours. So as the 20th century opens, the lighthouse continued to receive technological advances, especially to the types of lamps used for illumination. While the efficacy of the light was being discussed, the tower was slowly deteriorating. In 1912, pictured on the left, the lighthouse tower was found to have a large crack 130 feet above ground with smaller ones below. And the response was to install this metal mesh and reinforcing bands around the tower, in addition to applying a new protective coating. The Fresnel lens and illumination equipment were continuously being repaired, and it was deemed obsolete by the superintendent of lighthouses in 1929. And it was replaced with a simpler design from the discontinued Shinnecock Bay Lighthouse Station, which has since been demolished, and that's what replaced the first order Fresnel lens. And this lens it was smaller, it had fewer glass prisms, and it could rotate faster and flash more frequently, which helped mariners because it improved visibility. And the change allowed the lighthouse to flash every 7.5 seconds, which is what it flashes today, its unique flash pattern. Now, the original first order Fresnel lens was loaned to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia for display in 1933. And we'll kind of come back to that a little bit later. In 1939, the apparatus was changed from an incandescent oil vapor lamp to an electric incandescent lamp, because at that point, commercial electricity lines had been brought to the lighthouse station, and a motor drive replaced the clockworks and weights that had made the lens rotate. By 1949, the Fresnel lens and lamp were replaced by Kraus-Heinz electric light, which is pictured on the right here. And with the light automated, the Coast Guard decided in 1969 that the lighthouse no longer needed to have staff at the lighthouse to maintain it, which ended a 143-year history of light keepers. By this time, maintenance of the brick tower continued to be a problem because of the harsh environment, that harsh salt air. The structure had lost large portions of its exterior. And the Coast Guard originally made plans to make permanent and temporary repairs, but instead they used the money to build a water tower 2 miles east at Robert Moses State Park, it's still there, with a light that would beam 2 powerful strobe light flashes every 10 seconds. The water tower was 30 feet taller than the lighthouse, and on a clear night, it could be visible for much more than 20 miles. Also, it required minimal maintenance because it had no moving parts. There were 4 flash tubes that would be activated automatically in case there was any malfunction. But unfortunately, because of that, the Coast Guard decommissioned the lighthouse in December of 1973. So at this point, serving no practical purpose, the Fire Island Lighthouse continued to deteriorate. In 1978, there were plans to demolish the lighthouse, which triggered citizens to take action, thus creating the Fire Island Lighthouse Preservation Society that same year. The Coast Guard turned over the lighthouse, and it was declared by law to be within the boundaries of Fire Island National Seashore in 1979. And it was actually put on the National Register of Historic Places, but this did not guarantee its survival. The Coast Guard declared the lighthouse unrepairable and slated it for demolition. And the Park Service didn't have the financial capacity to restore it. And really all they can do was prevent it from further deterioration. But that is where our Knights in Shining Arbor, the Fire Island Lighthouse Preservation Society, come in. And they raised more than $1.5 million for the restoration project in 1982. At that time, the superintendent of Fire Island, who also just so happened to be the Preservation Society president, Tom Roberts, said the effort is not directed to saving the lighthouse to save the lighthouse just to save it. It is directed to saving the lighthouse to put it to work, educating us with the lessons it holds, inspiring us with the heroics of its story, and linking us with the past that can fortify us for the future. The history of the Fire Island Lighthouse reflects the entire history of the lighthouse system, which is pretty neat. So on Memorial Day, May 25th, 1986, the Fire Island Lighthouse was relit and reinstated as an official aid to navigation. And then in 1989, the tower was open for public visitation for the first time. Now, when they restored it to its 1939 condition with that signature black and white alternating bands and the distinct flash pattern of every 7.5 seconds. Now, what's great about the Preservation Society is they continued other restoration projects as far as bringing back the boathouse from the U.S. Life Saving Service, restoring the keeper's quarters, and the organization took a really major step in 1996 when the Park Service transferred the responsibility for daily operations and routine maintenance to the Society. So while elated at the completion of the tower restoration, the Preservation Society, they were troubled that something crucial was missing from the site, and that was the original first order Fresnel lens. As I mentioned earlier, it was removed from the second tower and loaned to the Franklin Institute on display in 1933. And the lens was an important artifact that envisioned for inclusion in the park's cultural history collection. The lens was planned to be removed from the Franklin Institute in 2000. So after formal discussions between the Institute, Fire Island, and the Preservation Society, the 4-ton relic returned to Fire Island for the first time in 2007, and it was carried in 21 crates containing 900 pieces. Now, let me tell you, that is some puzzle piece to put together. Its new home is designed specifically to display the 16-foot artifact, the Fresnel Lens building, which was completed and opened to the public in 2011. And that is the picture on the lower left-hand side, the Fresnel Lens building. The lighthouse is open for tours 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 5. If no one has visited before, I highly recommend it. It is very cool to see, very cool to go up the tower and see the views. On a really clear day, you can see all the way out to the New York City skyline. Plus, we have the Preservation Society there, as well as the National Park Service volunteers, who are a wealth of information. If you decide to go and you're bringing small children, just remember that there is a height requirement. You have to be at least 42 inches tall, kind of like reminds me of like a roller coaster. But while you're there, be sure to visit other historic buildings, which include the Lighthouse Museum, which was formerly the Keeper's Quarters, the Fresnel Lens building that I had mentioned, and the boathouse that has an exhibit on the life-saving service. So as you discovered today, the Fire Island Lighthouse was built out of necessity to warn mariners closely approaching Fire Island. It serves, what makes it really important is that it serves as a symbolic structure of Fire Island's maritime history and the history of lighthouses in general. But over its almost 200-year history, it has evolved into a local landmark and icon. It is a source of pride for Fire Island residents, representing, the comfort of home. And in general, I feel that lighthouses invoke certain feelings in people, maybe feelings of safety, of danger, romance, eeriness, supernatural, or maybe a sense of calm. I always found lighthouses to be eerily romantic. When I first moved to Fire Island and I am living at the ranger station next to the lighthouse, I was there all alone for the month of December. And it was very eerie and a little creepy, I'm not gonna lie. But I became very close with it. It means a lot to me to be so close to the lighthouse, to know the history, to have the opportunity to share the history of the lighthouse with other people. It's really amazing. It's a real sight to see. So in a way, lighthouses are like feelings, pointing to one direction, and another view. So that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope you found this program enlightening. And if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the chat or let Tara know, but I will be open to questions.
Julie, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. I enjoyed that.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yes, I'm sorry that it was such a tragic event that spurred the lighthouse to become.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
was something.
and that happened in 1850. We have to think that's the time of the Industrial Revolution. That, unfortunately, during that time, during the Industrial Revolution, a lot of tragic things did occur to have, these types of things, laws, policies, establishments in place. So it's also part of a larger revolution in America's history. So
Very true. Very true. Can you tell us a little more about some of the stories maybe that you might know of the lighthouse keepers? As you say, these lighthouses are eerily romantic, and I'm certain that the keepers must have some great backgrounds or stories to tell.
yes, there are a lot of stories from the keepers. It was a very isolating place to be. It was a very difficult place to raise a family, especially because it was so isolated. I unfortunately do not know any personal stories. However, I can recommend this book, Fire Island Lighthouse, Long Island's Welcoming Beacon. They have an entire chapter dedicated to stories of the lightkeepers. I did want to include some in the presentation, but I wasn't sure how long it was going to be. But I'm sure you have this book on loan at the library. I highly recommend this. I will say though, there are no ghost stories. There's no supernatural stories. No keepers who went insane. There's nothing of the sorts.
Now, how many lighthouses are there on Long Island?
Let's see. There's one, two, three. I believe it's 6.
Wow. I have some homework to do. I'd love to visit. I have more time now. When we visit the Fire Island Lighthouse, do we need tickets or can we just show up?
So in order to climb up the tower, there is a fee. It is $10 for adults, but there are also discounts for children and veterans as well. Highly recommend it. It goes towards the Preservation Society. It goes towards all those restoration projects. So you're doing good by going up the tower there. But the museum at the keeper's quarters is free, as well as the lens building and the boathouse are all free of charge. And walking around the grounds is absolutely beautiful.
And do you know specifically which ferry people should take to get to that lighthouse?
Great question. So you do not need to take a ferry to get to the lighthouse. All you have to do is take the Robert Moses Causeway south and take it down to Field 5. You park at Field 5, walk on the boardwalk to the lighthouse, and there you are.
That's great. Now, I know I keep asking these questions. Please, anyone, feel free. If you have any questions, jump in. No? Well, while you're thinking about it, if you have any more, please feel free to put it in the chat. But I am going to tell you a little bit more about some of the upcoming nature programs that we have coming up at the library, if you don't mind. I'm going to add them to the chat so that you can see them also. Just give me a second. Okay, there we go. So on Tuesday, May 17th, we are hosting a program called Night of the Shooting Stars. That program will be presented by Joe Rayo, a longtime meteorologist from News 12. And in that program, he's going to talk about a comet that had broke apart in 1995. And now the debris from the comet is causing a meteor outburst and shower that's due to arrive to our skies in about 2 weeks. So it will be certainly something to see. And so for more information about that, please join us for that program. Again, that's Night of the Shooting Stars on Tuesday, May 17th. And then on Wednesday, May 18th, the day after, we're going to learn about whales in the program called Inside the Mind of a Whale. And that's going to be presented by the Whaling Museum and Education Center at Cold Spring Harbor. To register for any of these programs, please visit us at online, communitylibrary.org, or stop in, or certainly give us a call at 631-399-1511, extension 240. And as some of you have done in the past, you have my email because I sent you the Zoom link. So feel free to shoot me an email if you're interested in any of those programs, and I can sign you up from that. And to learn more about the Fire Island National Seashore and the Lighthouse, please visit the Fire Island website, and I'll give that to you. That's www.nps.gov/FIIS. That's 2 I's. That's it for my announcements for this program. If anyone has any questions, jump in. If not, that's okay. I'd love to thank you, Julie, for coming and doing this presentation.
You're welcome.
I'm certain to be visiting this summer, and I'm sure you'll see some of the vases from tonight there as well. Great. It's a great program. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Okay, everyone, have a good night.